I'm 76 years old. And the hardest thing I've had to admit this late in life is that I was never truly too busy. I was just afraid. I'm sitting alone as I say this. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet room, a chair that creaks when I shift my weight, and a clock I can hear more clearly than I used to. When you reach my age, sound behaves differently. Silence gets louder. Time does too. I don't say these things for sympathy. I don't even say them for myself anymore. I've already lived with them long enough. I'm saying them because if I don't, then this life, all of it, will end without ever being spoken honestly. Most people think regret comes from big mistakes, affairs, betrayals, crimes, loud disasters. Mine didn't. Mine came from delays, from later, from nodding and saying, soon I promise, from choosing the safe answer instead of the true one. At 76, you start counting differently. You don't count years ahead. You count what's left behind you. Birthdays stop feeling like celebrations and start feeling like markers. You realize you've already had your last first day of many things. You just didn't know it when they happened. Days. These days, people don't call much. That's not a complaint. It's just how it is. Everyone has their own lives. I used to say that too. I look around and I see proof of a life that was full on paper. Work awards. Family photos where I'm standing slightly to the side. Old calendars filled with crossed-out days. I kept everything organized. I was proud of that. I thought being responsible meant being present in the right way. I was wrong about what present meant. When I was younger, I told myself I was doing what needed to be done. Providing, building, keeping things stable. That story is very easy to believe when everyone around you benefits from your effort, at least on the surface. I wasn't a bad man. That's important for me to say. I didn't wake up trying to hurt anyone. I didn't abandon my family. I came home most nights. I paid the bills. I showed up when it mattered, or at least when I thought it mattered. But fear doesn't always look like running away. Sometimes it looks like staying exactly where you are and calling it duty. I was afraid of being awkward, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of opening doors I wouldn't know how to close, afraid that if I slowed down, I'd have to feel things I'd spent years avoiding. So I stayed busy. Busy was respectable. Busy earned praise. Busy gave me excuses that no one questioned. If I missed a school event, I had a reason. If I postponed a conversation, I had a deadline. If I didn't call back, it wasn't personal. I was just exhausted. That's what I told myself. What I didn't understand back then is that time doesn't keep score the way we do. It doesn't care about intentions. It only remembers what happened and what didn't. In my 20s, life felt endless. I thought people who talked about regret were just dramatic or unlucky. I assumed wisdom would arrive naturally, without cost. In my 30s, I was in motion all the time. Mornings blurred into evenings. Weeks disappeared into years. I remember telling someone, things will slow down once we're settled. We never really settled. In my 40s, cracks started to show. Not loud ones, quiet ones. Missed dinners, short answers. A growing sense that everyone around me was aging faster than I was noticing. I thought I had time to catch up. I didn't realize that catching up isn't how relationships work. They don't wait at the same place you left them. They keep moving, even when you don't. Now, at 76, I can trace the outline of my life clearly. The shape of it makes sense. That's the cruel part. Understanding comes when usefulness is almost over. I used to believe fear was something obvious. Sweaty palms, panic, running away. But most of my fear was quiet, polite, disguised as responsibility. I was afraid to ask questions I might not like the answers to, afraid to sit still with someone else's pain, afraid that if I stopped performing, I wouldn't know who I was anymore. So, if you're listening to this and thinking, that doesn't sound so bad, I understand. That's exactly what I thought too. 4 decades. The cost doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces so small you barely notice them leaving. By the time you do, there's very little left to trade. This is only the beginning of the truth I avoided for most of my life. By the time I noticed something was wrong, it didn't feel dramatic. There was no single moment where everything broke. It felt more like waking up in a house you've lived in for years and realizing the walls have shifted slightly inward. Not enough to panic. Just enough to feel tight. I remember a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. I came home late, like usual. The lights were on, but the house was quiet. Dinner had been eaten already. There was a plate in the sink, rinsed but not washed. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it, as if it might explain something to me. I told myself, everyone's tired. This is normal. That sentence carried me for years. I missed things in ways that were easy to justify. A recital I arrived halfway through. A birthday dinner rescheduled twice. A long conversation cut short because I had an early meeting. I always planned to make it up later. Later became my favorite word. People stopped asking as much. That part happened so gradually I didn't notice. When invitations slow down, you don't get an alert. You just realize one day that your calendar is emptier, and so is your phone. I thought that meant I finally had balance. What it really meant was that people had learned not to rely on me for certain things. At work, I was dependable, predictable. I knew my role. I liked that. There were clear rules. Effort went in, results came out. If you stayed late, you were valued. If you sacrificed, you were praised. Home didn't work like that. There was no scoreboard. No promotions for listening better. No applause for being emotionally present. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. So I leaned into what I understood. I remember one night being asked a simple question. Nothing confrontational. Just, "Are you happy?" I answered too quickly. Said yes without thinking. The word came out smooth, practiced. I'd been saying it for years. But the room went quiet after that. Not angry. Just quiet. That's when I first felt it. That small, uncomfortable sense that I was lying, but not in a way I knew how to fix. I didn't know how to talk about fear. No one taught me that. I was raised to believe fear was weakness, and silence was strength. You keep going. You don't dwell. You don't slow down enough for doubt to catch you. So when something felt off, I worked harder, took on more responsibility, stayed busier. Busyness became armor. In my 50s, losses started arriving. Parents first, friends next. One by one. Funerals became more common than weddings. I stood at gravesides and promised myself I would call people more often, be more present. I meant it every time. But intention is slippery. It feels like action until you look back and realize nothing changed. I watched people around me adjust. Some softened. Some grew quieter. Some reached out in ways that surprised me. I admired them from a distance. Distance became my default position. There were moments I almost crossed the line back into closeness. Times I opened my mouth to say something real, to admit I was scared, or lonely, or unsure, and then I'd feel that old tightening in my chest, that fear of not knowing what would happen next. So I'd joke, or change the subject, or say I was tired. Tired was always believable. The strange thing is, people don't accuse you when you live like this. They adapt. They fill the space you leave behind with their own strength, and by the time you notice, they don't need you in the same way anymore. That realization hurts more than anger ever could. I remember the first time someone told me something important after it had already happened, not because they forgot to tell me, but because they didn't think I'd have time. They said it casually, like it was obvious. I laughed it off. Inside, something sank. I still told myself I had time. Retirement was coming. Things would be different then. I'd finally slow down. Finally show up fully. Finally have the conversations I'd been postponing for decades. Retirement did come. What I didn't expect was how quiet it would be. The structure disappeared overnight. No meetings. No deadlines. No urgent emails. The busyness that had protected me was gone, and without it, everything I'd been avoiding finally had room to breathe. That's when the weight really settled in. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was revealing. I started remembering moments I'd brushed past, expressions on faces I hadn't paid attention to, words that had been invitations I never accepted. I understood then that the damage hadn't been dramatic. It had been cumulative, like water wearing down stone. No single choice ruined my life. Thousands of small ones shaped it, and I was only beginning to understand the cost. The moment of clarity didn't arrive with fireworks. It didn't come with shouting or tears or some dramatic collapse. It came quietly, the way most truths do when you've spent a lifetime avoiding them. It came in a hospital room. I was sitting in a chair that wasn't meant for sleeping, but I'd slept in it anyway. My back ached. The lights were too bright. Machines made soft, steady sounds that felt louder than they should have. Someone I loved was lying in that bed. I won't dress it up. They were dying. Not suddenly. Not tragically. Just finishing. The way people do when time has decided it's done negotiating. We had talked, of course, over the years, about schedules, about plans, about practical things. We were very good at practical things, but as I sat there, I realized how many conversations we had never had, not because we were angry, not because we didn't care, because I kept waiting for the right moment. I remember thinking, I should say something meaningful now, and then realizing I didn't know how. That's when it hit me, not all at once, but heavy and undeniable. I hadn't been busy. I had been afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of opening emotions I didn't know how to hold. Afraid of being seen clearly, without my roles and routines to hide behind. So I had chosen delay, over and over again, and delay had finally run out. I held a hand that felt thinner than it used to. I listened to breathing that wasn't steady anymore. I wanted to say everything all at once, all the things I meant to say someday. But someday doesn't exist in rooms like that. Words don't come easily when you've trained yourself not to use them. What I did say felt small, insufficient, polite. And then there was no more time. After that, life didn't fall apart. That's another thing people get wrong. The world doesn't stop for your realizations. The days keep coming. The sun still rises. You still need groceries. You still need to sleep. But something inside me shifted permanently. I started seeing my past clearly, without excuses. I saw how often I'd chosen being needed over being present. How I'd confused reliability with connection. How I'd measured my worth by how much I could endure instead of how deeply I could feel. Some things can't be fixed. That's the part no one likes to talk about. You can apologize, but you can't relive moments. You can explain, but you can't rewind silence. You can regret, but regret doesn't rebuild time. There are voices I'll never hear again. Questions I'll never get to answer. Versions of myself I'll never meet. I used to think being remembered meant leaving something behind. A career, a reputation, proof that I mattered. Now I understand something simpler and much harder. You're remembered in moments, in how safe people felt with you, in whether they believed you truly saw them. That kind of memory isn't built later. It's built while you're distracted, thinking you'll get to it eventually. Old age is lonely in a very specific way. Not always because you're alone, but because you finally understand what you missed, and there's no one left to explain it to. I don't hate my life. I want to be clear about that. There were good days, real joy, laughter, pride, love, even if I didn't always know how to show it. But love that isn't expressed doesn't land the way you think it does. If you're listening to this and you're younger than me, much younger, I won't tell you what to do. That's not my place. I'll just tell you what I wish I had known. Fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Later is safer. Busyness doesn't mean importance. And time is not as patient as it feels when you're in the middle of it. You don't have to fix your whole life. You don't have to make grand changes. But when someone reaches for you, with a story, a question, a feeling, don't treat it like an interruption. It might be the moment that stays with them. I don't have many years left. I feel that in my bones now. I move slower. I forget names. I rest more than I used to. What time I have, I try to spend differently. I sit longer in conversations. I say things before they feel perfectly formed. I let silence happen without rushing to fill it. It doesn't undo the past, but it makes the present quieter in a way I can live with.